I was 15. Sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor, my back pressed against the cool wood paneling, I tried to disappear. My small, cheap cassette player rested in my lap, a fragile bridge to a world that still made sense. I pressed the foam earpiece tightly against my ear, lowering the volume until the tape hissed just beneath comprehension. It was a recording of Leo and me, of laughter and mistakes, of clumsy lullabies and guitar chords that never quite sounded right. His voice, high and clear, bounced against mine. I had tried to teach him a chord, and he had insisted I was wrong. I laughed. He laughed. Outside my room, the house was quiet now. The shouting had ended about an hour ago, but the silence that followed was far worse. It pressed against my chest, heavy and immovable. It wasn't just quiet. It was final. It was the silence of division, of choices made without asking, without caring, of me, left unmentioned. Then, I heard them downstairs. Calm voices now, measured and deliberate, like accountants tallying the value of office furniture. "I'll take Maya," my mother said, Cynthia's voice sharp and cold, slicing through the air. Maya was 12, easy to love, pretty, everything they considered valuable. There was a pause, a scraping of a chair on tile. "Fine," my father said. His voice was rough, tired, coated with the exhaustion of someone who always thought himself clever. "Leo stays with me." Leo, my brother, 10 years old, already useful, already good with his hands, already someone they could assign, divide, and claim. I held my breath. I waited for my name. "And Ara?" I imagined hearing it said, imagined them considering me for even a moment. But no words came, only silence. A silence so thin it felt ready to snap, so precise it told me everything I needed to know. I was left out. I looked down at the cassette player. My hand trembled as I pressed the eject button. The black plastic door popped open, and I lifted the tape out slowly, almost ceremoniously. The brown ribbon inside held our laughter, our mistakes, our music. It was all I had of him, and of me, the girl they never wanted to fight for. That night, I learned that my life could split in two, and that the moment of division could arrive silently, without warning. I was not an asset. I was not part of the calculation. I was the remainder. The line item left blank. The problem nobody wanted to solve. The following morning, the juvenile court smelled of old paper and industrial polish, the fluorescent lights humming an unwelcome tune. The benches were dark wood, the kind that left impressions of your body hours after you stood. I sat stiffly, trying to disappear into the shadows. Around me, children whispered, shifted, and clung to the worn edges of familiarity. But for me, familiarity had been taken. I was a stranger in the only world I had known. The judge looked at the files in front of her, not at me. "Pending placement," she said, her voice monotone. "Temporary custody is granted to the state." My caseworker, Yenna, placed a hand on my shoulder. Her eyes were kind but tired, carrying the weight of too many stories like mine. "It's time to go," she said softly. "Time to go." I didn't move immediately. I stared down at my shoes, at the floor. I felt the weight of abandonment in every step I took toward the unknown, toward a future carved out not by love, but by calculation. I left the courtroom carrying only the memory of Leo's laughter, the echo of our clumsy music, and a small, indestructible part of myself that they could never take. I was 15. I was alone. And for the first time, I realized that being left behind could hurt in ways words could never reach, but it could also make you stronger, sharper, and infinitely determined to survive. The juvenile court smelled like despair baked into every surface. The faint metallic tang of old wiring mingled with the industrial polish they used to scrub away misery, though it never worked. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, casting sickly yellow pools across the dark wood benches. I sat there, small and tense, trying to fold myself into the shadows. I was case 749B, a file number, a temporary custody decision, not a girl who had a name or a heartbeat or a story. I could hear the whispers of other kids, some anxious, some defiant, some resigned. Their voices reminded me that they, too, were catalogued, measured, and divided. Some would leave that room with hope. Some would leave carrying the weight of abandonment like a stone in their chest. I wasn't sure which I would be, but I already felt the cold slip of isolation wrapping around me, like a coat I could never take off. The judge's eyes barely lifted from the file in her hands. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. My life was written in black ink across pages of a file that smelled like old paper and bureaucracy. "Pending placement," she said, her voice devoid of inflection. "Temporary custody is granted to the state." The words landed like a hammer on a fragile glass globe. I tried to swallow, tried to remember to breathe. My stomach twisted in knots I didn't have names for yet. My hands gripped the edges of the bench, nails digging into my palms. My chest ached with a cold I couldn't shake. Yenna, my caseworker, knelt beside me. She smelled faintly of lavender and coffee, like someone who tried to hold on to normalcy in a place built on chaos. Her eyes were kind but tired, carrying decades of other children like me. She placed a firm, gentle hand on my shoulder. "It's time to go," she said. I didn't move immediately. I let the weight of her hand anchor me while the gravity of my situation sank fully in. This wasn't a visit, a temporary arrangement, or a gentle correction of my parents' mistakes. This was a transfer of ownership in the most clinical, sanitized form imaginable. The state would decide where I lived, who I lived with, how I spent my days. I wasn't Lara. I wasn't Ara. I was 749B. As we left the courtroom, I felt my body tense against every step. The hallways smelled of disinfectant and a faint hint of despair. The walls, lined with stark gray lockers, reminded me of a prison I hadn't yet realized I was in. I thought of Leo and Maya. My parents had divided them with a precision that made my blood run cold. And me? I had been left unspoken, unclaimed, and unvalued. Yenna spoke softly as we walked. "I know it feels unfair. It is. But we'll make sure you're safe." I nodded, my throat tight. Safe. The word felt empty, almost ironic. I wasn't unsafe because of strangers. I was unsafe because the people who were supposed to protect me had never really cared. Safe was a state I would have to create for myself. Later, in the small, impersonal room I would call home for the foreseeable future, I pulled the cassette player from my backpack. The tape of Leo and me was still there, waiting. I pressed play. His voice, clear and bright, filled the room, spilling warmth over the sterile walls. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. For the first time since the division, I allowed myself to feel something other than fear. The tape reminded me that I existed outside the files, outside the judgment, outside the cold decisions of adults who treated children like currency. I was 15. Forgotten, yes. Overlooked, yes. But not erased. Not yet. And as Leo's laughter echoed in that small room, I realized that even though the system didn't see me, I could see myself. I could remember myself. And that memory would be the start of reclaiming everything they had tried to take. The first night alone in my temporary room, I pressed the cassette player to my ear again. Leo's voice, high-pitched and lively, filled the air. His laughter bounced off the sterile walls, a fragile echo of a world I thought had been torn from me forever. I closed my eyes, letting the sound wrap around me like a thin, protective blanket. It was clumsy, imperfect. Our lullabies were off-key, our chords shaky, but it was ours. It reminded me that some things no one could take, not even the system, not even my parents. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the cassette player balanced on my knees. Outside, the hallway lights hummed softly, and the distant sounds of other children moving through their temporary lives seeped through the thin walls. I focused on the music. Each laugh, each mistake, each corrected chord felt like a lifeline, pulling me out of the numbness that threatened to swallow me whole. For the first time in hours, I felt the faint stirrings of hope. I thought about the way my parents had divided us. Maya, the pretty, easy one. Leo, the handy, capable one. And me? The line item left blank. The remainder. That cold, precise silence haunted me. But here, in this small room, Leo's voice reminded me that I was not nothing. I had existed. I had loved. I had been loved, even if briefly. Over the following days, the tape became my anchor. I played it repeatedly, memorizing the cadence of Leo's laughter, the rhythm of our mistakes. Each playback was a small act of rebellion, a quiet declaration. I exist. I matter. I am not invisible. Yenna, my caseworker, noticed my attachment to the cassette. She didn't question it, didn't tell me to stop. Instead, she brought me a small notebook one afternoon. "Write," she said softly. "Or draw. Or record. Anything to keep yourself." I took it and began scribbling. Awkward sketches at first, fragments of thoughts and feelings I hadn't been allowed to speak aloud. Then words, clumsy and raw, spilled across the pages. Fear, anger, loneliness, longing. The notebook became another layer of protection, a way to solidify my existence when the world tried to ignore me. Music, words, memory, they became my lifeline. I realized that while the state could dictate where I slept or ate, they could not dictate who I was. They could not erase Leo's laughter from my mind or the memory of the small golden moments that belonged to us. I could carry them anywhere, shielded inside my own heart. I began to imagine a life beyond the courtroom, beyond temporary custody, beyond my parents' indifference. I imagined a version of myself who could take what was stolen and transform it into strength. Every laugh on that tape, every clumsy note, became a spark, a reminder that the girl who had been left behind could survive, and someday, maybe even thrive. That tape, small and fragile, was more than a recording. It was proof. Proof that I had been part of a family once. Proof that love existed even in fleeting moments. Proof that I could endure. And as I lay in that temporary bed each night, the tape playing softly, I allowed myself the tiniest flicker of belief. I might be forgotten by some, overlooked by others, but I would never forget myself. I was 15. Alone, yes, but not powerless. Not yet. And as I drifted to sleep, with Leo's voice echoing in the quiet room, I knew something inside me had shifted. Somewhere in the echoes of that tape, a promise was forming. A promise that I would rise from the remainder, the line item left blank, and claim a life that was wholly, undeniably mine. Years passed. The girl who had been case 749B, the line item left blank, had become a woman who refused to be measured or catalogued. Music had been my sanctuary, my rebellion, my language when the world refused to hear me. I had learned to translate pain into sound, anger into rhythm, sorrow into melody. I had built a life out of the fragments they left behind, piecing together strength from memory, from tapes, from whispered affirmations I repeated in the dark. Then the alert came. A sharp buzz from my phone, bright against the soft glow of my studio monitors. I froze, the green lights reflecting off the polished wood of my console. It was my bank's legal portal, a loan agreement, pending review. And at the top, my parents' names, Cynthia and Mark. I laughed, a short, incredulous sound that felt foreign in my own ears. 16 years. 16 years after they had divided my siblings like property, they returned, not with apologies, not with explanations, but with a demand. Sign here. Co-sign. be complicit in their plans once more. They assumed I was still the same girl who would tremble at their voice, the one who had been left behind. They didn't know me anymore. They had no idea who they were asking to sign their papers, no idea who I had become. The state had taught me lessons they never could: contracts, consequences, leverage. I knew my worth, my power, and the limits of their reach. I understood the language of legal authority far better than they ever would. And for the first time, I realized I had a choice they could not take from me. I placed my finger on the screen, hovering over the signature line. The memory of my 15th birthday, of the cassette player, and Leo's laughter surged through me. I remembered the silence of the floorboards, the division of my family, the cold, clinical voice of the judge. I remembered what it felt like to be left behind, unspoken, invisible, and I remembered how I had survived, how I had transformed. No, that was the only word that mattered. A single syllable, quiet but absolute. I would not give them the satisfaction of control. I would not allow the past to dictate my present, my finances, or my freedom. They had underestimated me, as they always had. But this time, they would be wrong. I leaned back in my chair, watching the green glow of the monitors paint the studio walls. I thought of Leo, the tape, the clumsy lullabies that had been our secret rebellion. I thought of every hardship I had endured, every silent night, every lesson carved out of pain and endurance. I had learned to fight quietly, to protect myself, to build a life from nothing. My parents' names sat on the screen, waiting for me to give them power I no longer possessed. I touched the screen, and instead of signing, I swiped them away, deleted the request. It was a small gesture, but it was mine. For the first time in 16 years, I felt a sense of closure. Not from them, not from an apology, but from my own assertion. I was not their property, not their remainder, not a line item left blank. I was Ara. I was the girl they had left behind, and now I was the woman who refused to be left behind ever again. The studio was quiet except for the soft hum of the monitors and the faint echo of a melody I had composed last night. I let it fill the room, fill me, fill the space they had tried to claim. This was my world, my rules, my life, and for the first time, it felt entirely mine. The cassette tape had long been retired, carefully stored in a small black box. Its ribbon, fragile but intact, held the echoes of my childhood. Leo's laughter, our clumsy lullabies, our attempts at chords that never quite fit together. I kept it not as a relic of loss, but as proof that I had existed before being left behind, proof that I had survived, proof that I had the power to create my own life. The world outside my studio hummed with normalcy, a rhythm I had finally learned to join. I had built my own sanctuary, a life stitched together with independence, creativity, and hard-won victories. Music had been my language, the notebook my confessional, and now my voice, strong, measured, unwavering, was my declaration. Then came the final confrontation. My parents, older, colder, unchanged in their arrogance, reached out with another demand. Not an apology, not recognition, not even curiosity about the woman I had become. Just a demand: sign, co-sign, make yourself complicit. I read their emails, the legalese, their attempts to manipulate through nostalgia and expectation. And for the first time in my life, I felt nothing but clarity. They did not own me. They had not for years. Every moment of fear, every night of loneliness, every silent lesson from the tapes and the courtroom had prepared me for this moment. I picked up my phone, opened the portal, and looked at their names: Cynthia, Mark. Two people who had divided their children like assets, two people who had left me unclaimed. Their attempt to reach me now was a test, but I knew the answer already. My hand hovered over the screen, poised to give them nothing. No. It was a simple word, but it carried the weight of 16 years. It carried the strength of survival. It carried the declaration that I would not be catalogued, divided, or erased ever again. I deleted the request, the small digital rebellion echoing louder than any protest they had ever made. I leaned back, letting the green glow of the monitors wash over me. The music I had composed the night before filled the studio, intricate and alive, a melody of reclamation and resolve. In its notes were every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of fear transformed into power. This was my world, my rules, my life. I thought of Leo, I thought of the tape, of our laughter and mistakes, of the small truths we had held on to even when the rest of the world had not. I realized that being left behind had not defined me. Surviving it had. The remainder had become whole. The line item left blank had been filled with strength, creativity, and unshakable identity. And in that moment, I understood something vital. The past could not control me. Their indifference, their cruelty, their calculations, all of it belonged to them. I belonged to myself. I had learned to take what was broken and make it beautiful, to take silence and make it sound, to take absence and fill it with presence. I pressed play on a new recording, my voice, steady and clear, singing a melody I had written. It filled the room, a soundscape of resilience and triumph. For the first time, I felt fully untethered from the life I had been left behind in, fully in control of the narrative I had chosen. I was Ara. I had been left out, left behind, and underestimated. And now I was whole, unbroken, and unapologetically mine.